In Uganda, lions sleep in trees, not trained. Behavior passed from mother to cub, generation after generation, that no other lion population on Earth has ever developed. Scientists have 4 theories and no consensus. The lions don't care. Same species as every other lion on the planet, just a completely different set of rules. Primate Kingdom. The story begins in the forests, the kind where the canopy closes above you and the light comes through in thin columns, and something that sounds like a scream turns out to be a greeting. Uganda holds more primate species per square kilometre than almost anywhere else on Earth. More than 20 species, all in this small country. In Kibale Forest in the west, more than 1,000 chimpanzees live in a single stretch of ancient rainforest. Scientists call it the primate capital of the world. That title is a count, not a promotion. Chimpanzees share approximately 98% of their DNA with humans. That figure is easy to hear and difficult to absorb. It means the behavioral distance between a chimpanzee and a human being is smaller than the distance between a chimpanzee and a gorilla. And yet what lives inside that gap, written language, legal systems, recorded history, we have spent centuries calling civilization. What the gap does not contain: long-term memory of betrayal, strategic planning across months, war. In 2026, researchers published in the journal Science documenting a territorial campaign in Ungogo, Kibale. Chimpanzee community expanded its range systematically over years, targeting isolated individuals from a neighboring group. They planned it. They executed it. Then they held territory. Mountain gorillas are quieter, more deliberate. Uganda's Bwindi Impenetrable National Park holds approximately 459 mountain gorillas, nearly half the total population on Earth, which today stands at 1,063 individuals. 30 years ago, there were fewer than 400. The species was in freefall. What happened between then and now is a conservation story Uganda has been building quietly for decades. The numbers didn't climb on their own, but the forests are only one piece of Uganda. Elsewhere, something is happening in the open, something harder to explain and harder to look away from. Tree climbing lions. In the south of Queen Elizabeth National Park, there is a section called Ishasha. The landscape looks, at first, like any African savanna: golden grass, distant hills, fig trees scattered across the plain. But in those fig trees, something sits that should not be there. A 400-pound male lion, draped across a branch 6 meters off the ground, watching the afternoon pass. This is not unusual in Ishasha. Entire prides do this. Males, females, cubs still learning how the world works. They climb together, sleep in the branches, and descend to hunt after dark. There are only 2 places on Earth where lions behave this way consistently: Ishasha, Uganda, and a small population at Lake Manyara, Tanzania. Every other lion on the planet stays on the ground. No one fully agrees on why. One theory: the ground in this part of Uganda overheats in dry season, and the canopy is several degrees cooler. Another: Tsetse flies, which have shaped sub-Saharan Africa's ecology for millions of years, concentrate at ground level. The lions may have climbed to escape them. A third: the height gives a broader view of prey moving across the plain. And a fourth, perhaps the most interesting: this is simply what Ishasha lions have always done. A behavior passed from mother to cub across generations, as embedded in this community as any human tradition. Not instinct. Inheritance. The best viewing is between June and September, or December and February, when dry season keeps the grass short. When an Ishasha lion finally descends, it comes down slowly, unhurried. The king of the jungle in Uganda turns out to be a creature of habits it can no longer fully explain. Source of the Nile. For most of recorded history, the source of the Nile was the greatest unsolved geographic mystery on Earth. Ancient Egyptians knew the river gave them civilization, but could not trace where it came from. Greek philosophers debated it. Roman emperors sent expeditions that returned without answers. The question outlasted empires. The White Nile emerges from the northern shore of Lake Victoria at Jinja, Uganda. The British explorer John Hanning Speke reached it in 1862 and wrote in his journal, "The Nile is settled." It was a reasonable conclusion. It was also incomplete. The Blue Nile, originating in the Ethiopian highlands, carries an estimated 80 to 90% of the river's total water volume, and some hydrologists trace the ultimate geographic source even further, to the Kagera River and the highlands of Burundi. The debate has run for over a century. What is not contested? The White Nile begins at Jinja, and at Jinja, you can touch it with your bare hands. That is the first thing people say, that it looks ordinary. The water moves quietly at the source, clear and shallow. A few kilometers downstream, the same water drops through grade 5 rapids, the kind that break boats and demand respect. Peaceful enough to hold in your hands, then powerful enough to rearrange your understanding of what peaceful means. From Jinja, the White Nile travels north to Khartoum, where it meets the Blue Nile from Ethiopia. Together, one river, moving through 11 countries, covering 6,650 kilometers to the Mediterranean. Close to 500 million people depend on that water. The river that starts here, quietly, is one of the foundational facts of human civilization. Uganda has been protecting something far more fragile. Deep inside Bwindi Forest, a decision was made that changed how conservation works everywhere, because someone realized the greatest threat to the mountain gorilla was not a predator. It was a tourist with a cold. Gorilla face masks. There is a rule in Bwindi Impenetrable National Park that stops visitors before they understand what it means. You must stay 10 meters from the gorillas at all times. If you show any signs of illness, a cough, a fever, you are refused entry. No exceptions, no negotiations, no refunds. Your permit costs $700. Most people assume this protects the tourists from the gorillas. It does not. The rule exists to protect the gorillas from you. Mountain gorillas share approximately 98% of their DNA with humans. That proximity means pathogens cross the species barrier with very little resistance. Respiratory diseases are the leading cause of mortality in wild mountain gorilla populations. A 2020 peer-reviewed study in Frontiers in Public Health documented transmission events where human respiratory viruses spread into primate groups and cause deaths. A common cold can move through an entire gorilla family in weeks. The animals have no immune memory for most human pathogens. They have never needed it before. In 2026, the protocols are precise, surgical-grade masks within the limit, enforced by rangers who are not there to negotiate. Maximum 8 visitors per gorilla family per day. 1 hour in the animal's presence, then out, behind your surgical mask. In a forest at the edge of the world, you are standing in front of an animal looking back at something it recognizes. The mask is not there to protect you from the gorilla. It is there because in this forest, you are the invasive species. Uganda's mountain gorilla population has climbed from fewer than 400 individuals, a species on a trajectory toward extinction, to 1,063. The 459 in Bwindi and Maganga are close to half the total population on Earth. That recovery didn't happen by accident. Rhino Recovery. By the early 1980s, Uganda had no rhinoceroses, not endangered, not critically low, 0. The last wild rhinos were killed during the Idi Amin period and the civil war that followed. Amal ruled from 1971 to 1979, 8 years in which conservation infrastructure collapsed along with nearly every other institution in the country. Rangers abandoned their posts because salaries stopped. Poachers moved into the vacuum. The rhinos, which had lived in Uganda for millions of years, were gone within a decade. Understanding why requires understanding what Uganda was living through. Poverty doesn't manufacture poachers. It creates conditions where poaching becomes the only available income in an area where nothing else exists. You protect what you can afford to protect. When a country cannot protect its people, it cannot protect its wildlife. In 2005, the Ziwa Rhino Sanctuary was established with 2 white rhinos, a single breeding pair transferred from Kenya and the United States as the beginning of something. Today, Ziwa holds 59 southern white rhinos, the only rhino species historically present in Uganda. They weigh up to 2 tons each. At Ziwa, you walk among them. A ranger walks with you, armed, carrying a radio. He has done this for years. He knows these animals by sight, by temperament. Rwenzori Mountains. At the equator, where you expect heat and humidity, there is snow. The Rwenzori Mountains rise along Uganda's western border, a range the ancient Greeks, working from second-hand accounts, named the Mountains of the Moon. They believed the Rwenzoris were the source of the Nile River. For nearly 2,000 years, that belief held in the educated world of Europe and the Mediterranean. It was wrong about the hydrology, but it captured something first-hand observers keep rediscovering. The Rwenzoris look like they belong somewhere else. Margarita Peak, the highest point in the range and the 3rd highest summit in Africa, stands at 5,109 meters, 16,763 feet. The combination of altitude and equatorial moisture patterns sustains permanent glaciers within 2.5 degrees of the equator. 2,000 years of human reasoning assumed this was impossible. The ice did not consult the assumptions. The hike-up compresses the world's biozones into a single vertical ascent, lowland rainforest, then bamboo, then moorland, and then a landscape with no easy name. The giant lobelia bequaiti, grows in dense clusters reaching 3 meters tall, vertical spikes rising from tight rosettes of leaves. The giant groundsel, Senecio johnstoni, reaches tree height, its thick bark insulating against nights that fall below freezing. Neither species exists anywhere outside this altitude band in the Albertine Rift. Not rare in the way that endangered means rare, singular. This is the only place on Earth where they grow. More than 95% of the Rwenzori ice has been lost since the first scientific surveys in 1906. What remains is projected to disappear within 10 years. 5 million people in the surrounding lowlands depend on meltwater from these glaciers for drinking water and dry season agriculture. In 10 years, this will be geology, not geography. Pearl of Africa and people. Uganda is a country where hippopotamuses block roads after sunset, animals weighing up to 3 tons, indifferent to headlights, where crocodiles rest on riverbanks that fishermen work the same morning, where elephants pass through farmland close enough to cause damage and close enough to cause wonder, sometimes the same week. The wildlife is not behind glass. It is adjacent to ordinary life in a way most of the world organized itself away from long ago. The population living alongside it is young, in ways nearly without precedent. The median age in Uganda in 2026 is 17.1 years. 64.6% of the population is under 25. 48.47% is under 15. More than half the country was born after the worst of its political history. What that produces is something harder to measure than demographics. Travelers consistently describe Uganda's people as the most striking thing about the country, not the gorillas, not the snow at the equator, not the Nile. The warmth is not the managed hospitality of a tourism economy. It functions even in places where tourists are rare. Uganda is wild. That word gets applied to the animals, the landscape, the history. But the wildest thing about Uganda might be the coexistence itself, the leopard moving through the same darkness as the village, the gorilla breathing the same air as the visitor behind the mask, the river that feeds 11 countries beginning here at a place you can touch with your hand. None of these things resolve each other. They exist in the same space at the same time, which is how most things worth paying attention to actually work. We called it wild, but maybe we were just far away.